I want to begin, my dear, at the exact moment my heart turned cold, not the moment I was hurt that came later, but the moment I knew. I was sitting at my own kitchen table, in the house my husband and I had paid for with 51 years of our lives, and my daughter-in-law slid a sheet of paper across the wood towards me, smiling that smile of hers, and she said, ever so gently, as though she were talking to a frightened child, "Just sign at the bottom, Mum. It's only to protect you." And in that moment, with the kettle still warming behind me, I understood completely that the woman sitting across from me was trying to take my home. Now I want you to imagine how I felt, 79 years old, holding a pen she had placed in my hand, being told it was for my own good. But to understand why I did what I did next, you have to go back with me, all the way to the beginning. My name is Margaret, though everyone has always called me Peg. I am 79 years old, and I have lived in the same small brick house on the edge of a Yorkshire village for 51 years. My husband Arthur and I bought it in 1973, when we were young and frightened and hadn't 2 pennies to rub together. It was a wreck then, my dear, damp in the back bedroom, a kitchen with a floor that sloped so badly, a dropped marble would roll clean into the hall. But it was ours, or it would be once we'd paid the mortgage, and we set about paying it the only way we knew how, which was slowly, and with a great deal of going without. Arthur worked at the quarry, and I cleaned other people's houses, and in the evenings we mended that little house ourselves. He learned to plaster from a library book. I learned to hang wallpaper by ruining 3 rolls before I got the 4th right. We laid that kitchen floor together one bitter January, on our hands and knees, and I remember him laughing at me because I'd got adhesive in my hair. And I remember thinking, this is the happiest I have ever been, on a cold floor with glue in my hair. When we made the final mortgage payment in 1998, Arthur bought a bottle of sherry we couldn't really afford, and we sat in the front room and toasted the 4 walls around us. Nobody can ever take it from us now. Peg, he said, it's ours, free and clear for whatever comes. I have thought about those words a great deal in recent months, my dear, a great deal indeed. Arthur passed away 6 years ago, quietly in his sleep in the back bedroom we'd once been unable to use for the damp. After 50 years of marriage, the silence of that house was the loudest thing I had ever heard. But I stayed. Of course I stayed. Every room held him. The kitchen floor we'd laid together, the garden where he'd grown his prize leeks for the village show, the little shed where his tools still hung exactly where he'd left them. To leave that house would have been to leave him, and I wasn't ready, and I'm still not ready, and I don't suppose I ever shall be. We had one child, my son Michael. A good boy, my dear, truly soft-hearted as a child, always bringing home injured birds and crying when they didn't make it. But soft-hearted boys sometimes grow into men who are too easily led, and that, I'm afraid, is what happened to my Michael. He married late, at 41, a woman named Sandra, and it is Sandra I must tell you about now, because this story in the end is really a story about Sandra. I tried to like her. I want you to know that. When Michael first brought her round, I made my best Victoria sponge and I put out the good cups. And I welcomed her into my home with an open heart, the way Arthur would have wanted. But there was something about Sandra, even from the first afternoon, that I couldn't quite settle with. It was the way her eyes moved around my front room while she talked, pricing things. I've cleaned enough houses in my life to know the difference between a person admiring your home and a person valuing it, and Sandra, from the very first cup of tea, was valuing. Still, I said nothing. Michael loved her, and she made him happy in her way, and who was I to begrudge my lonely son a wife? They lived 2 hours south in a rented flat, and I saw them perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, and we rubbed along well enough at a distance. It was only when Sandra lost her job, something to do with a sales company, the details were always vague, that things began to change. Because that was when Sandra and Michael decided, quite suddenly, that they ought to move closer to me. "To help you, Mum," Sandra said on the telephone, her voice dripping with concern. "You're not getting any younger, and we worry about you all alone up there. Now, my dear, I want you to notice something, because it took me a while to notice it myself. They didn't move in with me. They rented a house in the next village along, 15 minutes away. Close enough to help, but not so close that they'd actually have to live under the same roof and do the daily helping that real care requires. At the time, I told myself I was being an ungrateful old woman. I told myself my son had come home to me and I should be glad, and part of me was glad. But another part of me, the part that had cleaned 100 houses and learned to read people the way you read weather, was watching, quietly, the way old women do. Sandra began coming round 2 or 3 times a week. She would bustle in, full of energy, full of plans. She rearranged my kitchen cupboards to make things easier for you, Mum, which meant that for weeks I couldn't find a single thing in my own kitchen. She started going through my post to keep on top of the bills for you, and I let her, because what harm could it do, and besides, my eyes aren't what they were and the small print does defeat me these days. She took me to my doctor's appointments, and she would sit in the room with me, and she developed a curious habit of answering the doctor's questions on my behalf. "She's been ever so forgetful lately," she'd say before I'd open my mouth. "Haven't you, Mum? Ever so confused." And the doctor would look at me, and I would want to say, "I am no more confused than you are, young man," but something stopped me. Some instinct I didn't yet understand told me to let her think I hadn't noticed. Because I had noticed, my dear. I had noticed a great many things. Now I must tell you about the teaspoons, because the teaspoons are how I knew for certain that something was truly wrong, and I want you to remember this because it's the small things in the end that give people away. I had a set of teaspoons, you see. Silver ones, 6 of them in a little velvet-lined box. They were a wedding present from Arthur's mother, given to us in 1968, and they were the only thing of any real value I owned. I never used them. They lived in the bottom drawer of the dresser, and once or twice a year I'd take them out and polish them and put them back, just to feel close to the people who'd gone. One Sunday after Sandra had been round, I took out the box to polish the spoons the way I sometimes did when I was feeling lonely, and there were only 5. I counted again. 5. I emptied the drawer. I got down on my knees with my bad hip and searched the floor. 5 silver spoons where there had always been 6. Now, my dear, an old woman who lives alone is used to mislaying things. I might have blamed myself, but I knew those spoons. I had counted them 100 times over 50 years. There had been 6 on the Sunday before, and now there were 5, and the only person who had been in my house in between was Sandra. I didn't say a word. I want you to understand the discipline of that, because it was the hardest thing, to know you are being robbed in your own home and to say nothing, to keep smiling, to keep making the tea. But I had a feeling deep in my bones that a missing teaspoon was not the end of something. It was the beginning. And if I made a fuss about a teaspoon, I'd never find out what the beginning was the beginning of. So I held my tongue. And I started that very night to keep a diary. But first, my dear, I tested her. I'm not proud of how cunning I became in those weeks, but I'll tell you because it matters. The following Sunday before Sandra came, I took a £5 note and I folded it twice and I tucked it under the carriage clock on the mantelpiece. The clock Arthur won at the Works raffle in '84, where anyone tidying might find it. And I made a tiny pencil mark on the corner, the way you mark a thing you mean to watch. Then I waited. Sandra came and she bustled and she tidied, and when she'd gone I went straight to the clock. The note was still there. I confess I felt almost ashamed of myself. But then I lifted the clock right up, and underneath, where I'd also left £2 coins I hadn't mentioned to myself as part of the test, those were gone. She'd taken the coins, you see, the things that wouldn't be missed, and left the note, the thing that would. That told me everything. This was not a woman who took things by accident or in a muddle. This was a woman who calculated which things a confused old lady wouldn't notice. And I thought very calmly, standing there with the clock in my 2 hands, "You have badly misjudged how much this old lady notices, my girl." That was the night I fetched the exercise book. It was an old exercise book, one of Michael's from school that I'd kept for sentiment. I turned to a fresh page and I wrote the date, and I wrote, 1 silver teaspoon missing. Sandra here Thursday and Sunday. And from that day, my dear, I wrote down everything. Every visit, every comment, every time Sandra answered for me at the doctor's, every piece of post that went missing or arrived already opened. I wrote it all down in my shaky old hand, and I hid that exercise book inside the cover of Arthur's old gardening encyclopedia, on the shelf in the shed, where I knew Sandra would never look, because Sandra had never once in all her visits set foot in Arthur's shed. There was nothing in there she could price. And my dear, it is a good job I did, because over the following weeks my little diary began to tell a story even I hadn't fully imagined. First, there was the matter of the bank. I'd always banked at the little branch in town, and one day a letter came. Sandra was out for once, so I opened it myself, thanking me for my recent visit to discuss adding an authorized signatory to my account. I had made no such visit. I had discussed no such thing. When I telephoned the bank, a kind young woman told me that I had indeed been in the week before with my daughter-in-law, who had explained that I was finding things difficult and wished to add her to my accounts. Apparently I had seemed quiet but agreeable. I had not been in that bank for 2 months. Whoever had sat in that chair being quiet but agreeable, it had not been me. I wrote it all down, the date, the name of the young woman, everything. Then there was the for sale sign. Not on my house, not yet, but one evening, walking home from the shop, I passed the estate agent's window in town, and there in the display was a photograph of a house that looked remarkably like mine. The same brick, the same green door Arthur had painted. I stood there in the rain, my dear, my heart going like a hammer, reading the description. Charming character cottage, no onward chain, vacant possession available soon. It wasn't my house, the address was wrong, It was a similar house in the next street. I worked that out eventually and nearly wept with relief. But standing there, soaked through, I understood with total clarity what Sandra was working towards. She wasn't after my teaspoons. She was after my house. The teaspoon had just been a test to see whether the confused old woman would notice. And the confused old woman had passed the test by saying nothing at all. There was worse to come, my dear, and I found it by accident. One afternoon Sandra had left her leather folder on my hall table while she dashed out to her car, and I am not ashamed to say that I opened it, because a woman defending her own home is entitled to a look. Inside was a document I didn't fully understand at the time, but I copied down the words at the top in my diary, careful as a schoolgirl, lasting power of attorney, property and financial affairs. My name was on it. Sandra's name was on it, as the person who would make every decision about my money and my home if I were ever unable. And there, at the bottom, was a space for the signature of a doctor or a person who'd known me 10 years, to certify that I understood what I was signing. That space had a name penciled in it, a name I didn't recognize, a man I had never met. She had found someone willing to swear I understood a thing I had never even been shown. I closed that folder with my hands shaking, my dear, and I put it back exactly as I'd found it, square to the edge of the table, and I went and sat in Arthur's chair until I'd stopped trembling. Then I wrote it all down. It was my neighbour Doreen who gave me the courage to keep going. Doreen has lived 3 doors down for 40 years, and she misses nothing from behind her nets. She caught me at the gate one morning and she said, quiet like, Peg, I don't like to interfere, but that daughter-in-law of yours, she had a man round your house Tuesday when you were at the chiropodists. Let himself in with a key, suit and a clipboard, walked round the outside taking photographs. An estate agent, my dear, valuing my home while I was having my feet seen to. Doreen had written down the date herself on her kitchen calendar, bless her, because she'd thought it odd. 2 old women and their diaries. We are not as soft as people think. The pieces came together over those weeks like a jigsaw I almost wished I couldn't complete. Sandra answering for me at the doctor's, building a picture of a woman who couldn't cope. Sandra at the bank getting herself onto my accounts. Sandra with her power of attorney and her penciled-in stranger. Sandra going through my post, my finances, learning exactly what I had and where. And I knew, the way you know the weather is about to turn, that there would come a day when Sandra arrived with papers, and so I waited. I kept my diary, and I made 1 telephone call of my own in secret from the phone box outside the post office because I no longer trusted my own telephone to a solicitor in town, a Mr. Ellison, whose father had done Arthur's and my will all those years ago. I told him everything. He listened and he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, Mrs. Hartley, you are not confused. You are one of the sharpest clients I have spoken to all year. Here is what I want you to do. The day came on a Tuesday. I shall remember it always. Sandra arrived at 2 o'clock, brisk and bright, with Michael trailing behind her looking pale and uneasy, the way he'd looked as a boy when he knew something was wrong but couldn't bring himself to say so. She had a leather folder under her arm. She made a great show of fussing over me, settling me in my chair, and then she opened the folder on the kitchen table, the very table Arthur and I had eaten at for 50 years, and she began to talk. It was all for my benefit, she explained. Sheltered housing was so much safer for a woman my age. The house was far too much for me to manage, and it would be such a weight off everyone's mind if I simply signed the house over to her and Michael now, to avoid the care home taking it and to keep it in the family. I would have a lifetime right to stay, she said, though I noticed she didn't put that part in writing. She slid the paper across the wood, and she placed the pen in my hand, and she smiled that smile, and she said, just sign at the bottom, Mum. It's only to protect you. And that, my dear, is where we began. I looked down at the pen in my hand. I looked at my son, who couldn't meet my eyes. And then I did something Sandra did not expect. I set the pen down very gently on the table. And I said, before I sign anything, Sandra, love, I'd like a witness present. It's only proper for an important document. I've asked someone to pop round. Her smile flickered just for an instant. There's no need for that, Mum, she said quickly. It's all very straightforward. And at that exact moment, my dear, and I had timed it, I won't pretend I hadn't, there was a knock at the green door. Because I had asked Mr. Ellison, my solicitor, to arrive at 2:15. And he had. I shan't ever forget Sandra's face as that man stepped into my kitchen, briefcase in hand, and introduced himself. Mr. Ellison, solicitor, acting for Mrs. Hartley, he said pleasantly. I understand there are some documents to discuss. May I see them? And he held out his hand. Sandra had no choice but to give them over. He read them slowly while the kitchen went very quiet, and then he set them down and he said, these would transfer full ownership of this property, valued at some £210,000, to you and your husband for no payment whatsoever. Mrs. Hartley, is this what you wish to do? And I said in a clear, steady voice, looking right at Sandra, "No, Mr. Ellison, it is not. And I'd like it noted that I am entirely of sound mind, whatever has been said about me at the doctor's or at the bank or anywhere else." Then I asked Michael to fetch me a book from the shed, Arthur's old gardening encyclopedia. He looked confused, but he went and he brought it, and from inside the cover I drew out my little exercise book, and I laid it on the table, and I began to read aloud. The teaspoon, the bank visit I never made, the doctor's appointments, the opened post, every date, every detail. In my own shaky hand, written down at the time, which Mr. Ellison was kind enough to explain makes a thing called a contemporaneous record, and which carries a great deal of weight should anyone ever wish to make trouble. The silence in that kitchen, my dear, was the loudest thing I had heard since the night Arthur died. Sandra tried, of course. She blustered. She said I'd misunderstood, that it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd only ever wanted to help. "You're confused, Mum," she said, but her voice had lost its smoothness now, gone shrill at the edges. "You're not well. Tell them, Michael. Tell them how forgetful she's been." And she turned to my son for rescue the way she always had. But Mr. Ellison spoke first, very mild and very firm, the way the best men are. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, meaning Sandra, for she'd taken Michael's name, "a doctor will be the judge of whether this lady is confused, not you. And I have here a letter from her own GP, sought independently last week, confirming she has full mental capacity. I rather think the only confusion in this room is about whose house this is." Then he laid the power of attorney document on the table, the one with the stranger's name penciled in, and he asked Sandra, very quietly, whether she would care to explain who that man was, and how he came to be certifying my understanding of a document I had plainly never seen. And Sandra had no answer at all. The diary was the diary, and the dates were the dates, and the bank had records, and there is no arguing with an old woman who has written everything down. And then Michael, my soft-hearted boy, finally looked up at me, and his face crumpled the way it had when his injured birds didn't make it. And he said, "Mum, the spoon. Did you really a teaspoon?" And I said, "Yes, love, a teaspoon, because the people who will take a teaspoon when they think you're not looking are the same people who will take your house. It's only a matter of scale." Sandra left my house that afternoon and she did not come back. The marriage did not survive it, for it transpired, my dear, that I was not the first person Sandra had tried this with. There had been an elderly aunt of her own years before, and a previous arrangement that had gone the same way, which Mr. Ellison's inquiries later uncovered. Michael, when the scales finally fell from his eyes, was devastated and ashamed, and for a while he could barely look at me for the guilt of it. But he is my son, and I forgave him because he had been led, not leading, and because a mother's forgiveness is the one thing in this world that never runs out, no matter how it's tested. As for the karma, my dear, for I know that's what you've been waiting to hear, and I shan't pretend I didn't take a small, unworthy comfort in it myself. Sandra, in her hurry to secure my little house, had run up a great many debts on the assumption that a £200,000 property was about to fall into her lap. When it did not, those debts came calling. The rented house in the next village was given up. The last I heard, she had moved back south to a single room, with very little to her name, which is, I suppose, exactly the situation she had been so eager to arrange for me. People who dig holes for others, my Arthur used to say, ought to dig too. And Michael moved in with me in the end, not to take the house. To live in it with his old mum in the proper way, the way Sandra had pretended to want. He sleeps in his childhood room. He tends Arthur's leeks. And on Sunday afternoons, the two of us polish the silver teaspoons together, all 6 of them, for the 6th one was found, my dear, exactly where I'd suspected, in the bottom of Sandra's handbag the day she fled, though that's a small detail and I shan't dwell on it. We polish all 6 and we put them back in their velvet box, and we don't say very much because some things don't need saying. Now, my dear, here is the lesson, and I want you to hear it properly, because it's the reason I've told you all of this. The world is full of people who will look at an old woman or an old man or anyone they think is weak, and they will see not a person but a thing to be priced. They will mistake your kindness for foolishness and your silence for confusion. And the temptation, when you're old or tired or lonely, is to believe them, to start to wonder if perhaps you are confused, if perhaps you can't cope, if perhaps you should just sign at the bottom to keep the peace. Don't, please don't. Being old does not make you a fool. Being kind does not make you weak. And the quiet ones, the ones who notice the teaspoons and say nothing and write it all down, well. Sometimes the quiet ones are the sharpest people in the room. Trust your instincts, my dear. If something feels wrong, it very likely is wrong, and you are allowed to act on that feeling even when you can't yet prove it. Keep a record. Tell someone you trust, someone outside the family if need be. And never, ever let anyone put a pen in your hand and tell you that signing away everything you've built is for your own good. It is so rarely for your own good, It is so very often for theirs. Arthur was right all those years ago with the cheap sherry in the front room. Nobody can ever take it from us now, he said. He just didn't know, bless him, that I'd have to be the one to make sure of it. But I made sure, and I'd do it again. If this story has moved you, my dear, or reminded you of someone, perhaps an elderly parent or neighbour who might be quietly going through something similar without anyone noticing, then do me a kindness, would you, and check on them this week. Listen to them, believe them, and if they ever tell you that a teaspoon has gone missing, don't laugh it off. Pay attention, because you never know what a missing teaspoon might be the beginning of. Thank you for sitting with me a while. Sleep well, and mind how you go. Good night.